What's going on, y'all, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to show you how I made this terrain of a downed ATST for Star Wars Legion. So to start with, I found this beautiful ATST 3D model on Cults 3D. I'll put a link in the description. Printed it out, and for an FDM printer, it did pretty decent detail on standard quality. The next step was to break it apart, obviously. That was on purpose. Then I wanted to base paint it with black, so I used isopropyl alcohol and black acrylic paint and white acrylic paint. Mushed them together and shook up the results. Now there are parts of this where you'll see the ATST painted and not painted. It's just because I did it in different steps and decided to edit the results differently. Anyways, all the haters, leave comments below. One thing you'll note about looking at Star Wars models is that they sometimes have a blue tint in them, so I use like a stone cold blue. It's kind of gray. Mix it in with the gray paint. Get good results. The next part was to make a terrain for it, and I've come to like this foam core that you get at the dollar store. It holds its structural integrity. It holds its structural integrity pretty well. And then I knew I wanted to do a resin pour on it, but the last time I tried to do resin pour, it just seeped through all the foam and everything and ended up looking like garbage. So I used this little lid and decided that it would be perfect for the pond. So I put some hot glue on it and glued it down. Nice and sturdy. Definitely not going anywhere. And then I always use the insulation foam you can get at the hardware store for walls. It comes in like 4x8 sheets. That's what I use for my terrain to make rocks and hills and everything. Just you could stack it up. And I used my hot wire cutter to cut through the foam. It makes quick work of the foam, so I like it like that. And this is that yarn or sewing stuff. I can't remember what it's called. It's like a little grid for like yarn, and I knew that I was going to put mortar in there, and plastic doesn't just stick to mortar too well. It does to an extent, but you have to sand it and rough up the surface. But I figured if I put this mesh grid in the bottom of the pond, that the mortar would have something to adhere to and cling to better, kind of like rebar when you're reinforcing concrete. And I cut it out and used super glue to glue it down. It actually turned out to work pretty well. The next step was to weather the ATST. I knew that I was going to be putting it in mud, and it had been setting for a while because of the whole world that I've been building in this Star Wars Legion terrain. So I always use black acrylic paint and water and just depending on the density you want, you just, you know, it's the consistency of water you add. And I always cover the whole model mostly, and then just wipe off the parts that I don't want it to be shadowed as much. And then I'll either go with like a green and yellow, or like a green and brown, and just mix up different colors of paint and do a wash that way to get, you know, like a dirt and hard water runoff look. And the same principles apply here. You just dab it on where you think water would stay and run, like bits and pieces that it'd run off of, and then just wipe it off. But this looks so good that I ended up not wiping much of it off. And then I mixed up brown and orange and yellow paint and created a nice rust color. And the results turned out pretty well for the weathering on this model. I was pleased, if I do say so myself. Probably looks like shit, but that's the point of it, right? The reason I put more rust on the body was because it was going to be submerged a little bit in water. Figured it'd rust a lot easier. But who knows how spacemen will rust. Now I go back to the terrain and I use tile mortar, wall and floor mortar. It's basically the same stuff, but I don't use grout. I just find grout really hard to get set up correctly, and mortar isn't that hard. You just mix it up to a nice peanut butter consistency and spread it on, and it hardens. It's not too hard, and it's not very dense, but no matter the consistency you mix water and mortar, it'll set up. Unlike grout will turn to powder. Then I placed bits of the model where I wanted to put them, and the mortar is very strong, so it actually acts as kind of like a glue. So if you push it in far enough, that it will hold it, and unless you're going and trying to yank on it and pull it out, it's not going to go anywhere. It has a really high tensile strength. And then the last step for the base terrain was to add the tiny little rocks just as gravel and, you know, bits to give it more texture and make it look more realistic, because I do enjoy making my terrains look realistic. This was the build so far, and I used a little 28mm Stormtrooper for scale. Now it's time to base my terrain. I always use my Moo-Poo mixture, which is black paint and Mod Podge, and completely cover the surface of the terrain. And every little nook and cranny you can get, use different size brushes to really get in there. And then I come through with a dark brown. Normally when I'm doing terrain, I use a real dark brown first to get like dents, like wet mud, and then I add in just a hair of light brown paint and mix them together. And you can throw all different kinds of colors in there. You actually get really good results if you just throw colors in. You don't always have to stick with the same ones. But I just dab it in, and I try not to completely cover all the black bits because it makes really good shadow features. But still try to cover the majority of the terrain, if that makes any sense. I know I'm hard to follow. I do apologize. After I got the brown on, I mixed up a little bit of green and yellow, and I always try to lay out where I'm going to put my flocking and then throw down just a little bit of green. It makes the flocking stand out a little bit more. If not, it kind of loses its tone and texture. And then the last step was to make a light gray / brown mix, and then I covered and dry brushed those little pebbles and some different places where the dirt may be more dry, seeing it's going to be a swamp. The next step was to add flocking. Ah yes, everybody's favorite part, and including mine. I also enjoy the flocking quite a bit. I'd put some lichen down first, just draped over as vines, but unfortunately I forgot to film that, so sorry. But sometimes I'll just get into the groove and forget to check to see if the camera's on. It's a great shot of my ear. Wow. The last step to this build was one I was looking forward to the whole time. I found these little cattails at my local hobby store, and they're basically what inspired me to do this whole build. Sometimes you'll find things like that. And I used a little clay drill, hand drill, to drill holes for them, and hot glue to place them. Then threw in a little bit of Clump light green foliage, however you want to say it, and it just adds like shrubs and bushes, brambles and briars, and you can even take like little pieces of like yellow construction paper, different colors, and glue those to the top of those bushes. It makes it look like flowers, like some weeds have flowers on them and stuff. Just different things like that to make your terrain look more detailed, more realistic. The very final step was to add water resin. I had tried a resin pour before on the moss monster, and it didn't turn out too great after a couple of days. So I decided to use this little stick to keep it from splashing. And I knew that eventually, if I filled it up enough, that the plastic lid underneath the mortar would catch it all, and I would get some water showing on my terrain for once. So it turned out a lot better this time than it did last time, which I was pleased with. Pretty good. And then I threw on just a little bit of dark green foliage to kind of act as moss in the pond, seeing it's a swamp and stuff, stagnant water. And that was it. So yeah, that's the downed ATST and swamp. I appreciate y'all watching. If you haven't yet, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Leave me a note in the comments if you like this build, if you want to see more. I plan on doing more terrain models. And we'll see y'all on the other end of the trail. Thank you.